America and Oregon. Get ready to make history. With change on the way in the White House, 2 local congressional races could swing the balance of power in Washington, D.C.
Now for Congress, 2 more years.
Meanwhile, Portland gets ready for a major political overhaul.
This is a major shift. This is the most significant shift in governance that the city of Portland has seen in over 100 years.
And Portland voters get a new way to make their voices heard.
I don't really know how this works at all.
Joining me, Director of Editorial Content at Carpenter Media Group, formerly Pamplin Media, Dana Haynes, and political analyst and former Oregon State Senator Rick Metzger. KOIN 6's Eye on Northwest Politics General Election Special starts now.
From KOIN 6, your local election headquarters, this is an Eye on Northwest Politics Special.
Welcome to our KOIN 6 election special. I'm Ken Body. It's a big election, both locally and nationally. And we start with an Oregon congressional race that's gotten the attention of the nation. It's the battle for the 5th Congressional District, a contest that could help decide the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives. It pits incumbent freshman Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez-DeRemer against Democrat challenger Janelle Bynum. Chavez-DeRemer is the former mayor of Happy Valley. Bynum is a businesswoman and state representative who stepped away from the legislature to run for Congress. The two debated in the KOIN 6 studios earlier this month.
It's not just 1, 2, or 3 issues. It's all the issues. That's how we get good policy, being center-forward, pragmatic, thoughtful thinkers and independent thinkers.
I will continue to serve this district in a bipartisan way, just as I did when I worked on the CHIPS Act, so I will continue to work in the semiconductor and technological space.
The 5th District includes Portland's eastern suburbs and goes all the way to Central Oregon, including Sisters and Bend. This is a target contest for both major parties. And to talk about Congressional District 5 and what it means for Oregon and beyond, Dana Haynes, Director of Editorial Content at Carpenter Media Group, formerly Pamplin Media. Welcome, Dana.
Glad to be here.
Why are the national parties so interested in this race?
Because the Democrats need to flip 5 seats in order to take the House of Representatives. And Oregon, of course, is on the West Coast, so we have some of the last polls to close. The DCCC, the RNCC, the 2 organizations that are vying for control of the House, they're going to be watching this race, one race in Washington and one race in Alaska, as the ones that will be the tipping point races for the entire nation.
Talk about the money that's being put into this race.
Unbelievable numbers. Janelle Bynum raised $3.4 million in the last quarter. That's numbers we don't ever hear in Oregon races ever again. Chavez-DeRemer, she would raise $1.39 million. This is one of the most expensive races we have ever seen, and there's lots of national money coming in. Now, that was a complaint 2 years ago that both the Democrats and the Republicans kind of ignored that Oregon race. It probably should not have gone to a Republican. It surprised a lot of people because the Democrats have a registration edge in that district. This time, no one's ignoring the race. The money's pouring in.
Both candidates are trying to emphasize bipartisanship. Is that a result of what the electorate looks like in that district?
Well, you're exactly right. It's a purple district. The registration, I just looked it up a minute ago, 32% Democrat, 25% Republican. But it's worth remembering that the grand majority of the population for CD5 is in Clackamas County. Now, obviously, Chavez-DeRemer has name recognition there, but so does Bynum. 4 years in the legislature serving that same Happy Valley area. And her committees in the Oregon House include the Judiciary and the Economic Development, Small Business and Trade Committees. So she's got name recognition. 2 years ago, Representative Chavez-DeRemer beat somebody who didn't have name recognition, Jamie McLeod Skinner. That's going to be a major difference, I think, this year.
Bynum has beaten Chavez-DeRemer twice in state legislative races. Will that make any difference this time around?
It's a different kind of race, so I'm not sure. I think it's going to be neck and neck. The Cook Political Report, which is nonpartisan, it says it's neck and neck. They're polling right around 42, 43%. So it could make a difference. The name recognition could make a difference. The big, big money that the Democratic candidate has, that's making a difference. You can't turn on a television without seeing her ads.
What are the issues in the 5th, specifically in that district, that could sway the vote?
Well, one of them is going to be reproductive rights, and that's come up a lot because Chavez-DeRemer has been somewhat equivocal in where she stands on that issue. She claims she hasn't been. Janelle Bynum says she has been. So that's going to be one of them. Economic issues are always big. Right now, everybody's feeling the pinch, even though the economy nationwide is quite good. People aren't necessarily feeling it. So that's going to be part of it. And then just frankly, some voters like to split tickets, too. It's the thing we do out here in the West, for instance. So you could see an area in which Kamala Harris does quite well, vote for a Republican for the House because they like to split power. So that could play as well.
Another closely watched race for essentially the same reasons, Washington State's 3rd Congressional District, which is Southwest Washington, including Vancouver. The Washington 3rd has another freshman congresswoman trying to hold on to her seat, auto shop owner Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, who is a Democrat. She's running against Republican, former Green Beret and Special Forces veteran Joe Kent of Yacolt. And this is a rematch of the same race from 2 years ago, which Gluesenkamp-Perez won by just 2,600 votes, less than a percentage point. Both are trying to paint the other as extremists, as we saw in our KOIN 6 debate here in this studio just a couple of weeks ago, when they clashed on everything from immigration to abortion.
I voted for the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that caps spending. I presented a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget. On Ag Committee, I listened to the young farmers who've been priced out of farmland. On small business, I dismantled the regs that are a moat protecting big corporations with compliance lawyers from small businesses like us.
We have to put a cap on spending, not spend more than we take in at the federal level, actually prioritize the things that matter, like building a 3rd bridge and taking care of our citizens that are in crisis right now. We've got to get back to being energy independent. That's absolutely essential. And we've got to do a ton of deregulation to grow the economy.
Washington's 3rd District leans slightly Republican and went for Donald Trump in the last presidential election. Let's bring back Dana Haynes of Carpenter Media again. Both national parties think they can win this seat. The Democrats are desperate to keep it. And the 3rd has a lot of rural voters, as well as voters in cities like Vancouver and Longview, Camas. So the makeup of that district, how does that affect this race?
Well, when you consider that Gluesenkamp-Perez sits in both the agriculture and the small business committees in the U.S. House, that means she's been able to bring some bills back to her constituents. She's actually been able to do some constituent services. That might play well, especially in a pretty purple, pretty split area. Now, this is a kind of an interesting area, too, because it tends to vote Donald Trump. He wins really did. He beat Joe Biden 4 years ago in that area. And then 2 years ago, they sent a Democrat to the House. So it's one of those places willing to split tickets, go either way. I think she's got a fairly good chance of this one, but the Cook report, political report, puts this one again as dead heat. It's like 46-46. Mm-hmm. So at this stage, it's kind of anyone's guess.
Joe Kent is a Donald Trump supporter. He's been endorsed by Trump. How does that play into the politics of this race?
2 years ago, it did not. 2 years ago, Donald Trump endorsed him also, and he didn't win. So we'll see if that plays. One thing I think is pretty interesting. If you look at Oregon 5 and Washington 3, what do you get? 2 different races with women incumbents. They're young women incumbents. Both of them went moderate. The Democrat went to the moderate part of her party. The Republican went to the moderate part of her party. And neither of them made huge, glaring errors in their rookie years so that somebody could run against them. So these are very similar races. And these 2 races are, again, as we said earlier, these are the 2 that could decide who holds the House. I think it's fascinating that they're so similar.
Gluesenkamp-Perez says she's, quote, taking on the Biden administration. She's also a so-called blue dog Democrat. What does that mean for her standing with the fellow Democrats in D.C. if she wins?
Well, you say certain things when you're running, and everybody understands you do that sometimes in order to win. You can say, I don't like the president, I don't like this, that, other thing, and then how you vote on the floor ends up being what's really important, and whether or not how you vote in your committees. So there's politicking, and then there's governing, and there's voting, and one thing doesn't necessarily lead to the other. So I think she's going to be fine in her caucus.
One of the big issues in that district, of course, is the Washington State connection to the interstate bridge. We talked about that a lot during the debate. Joe Kent wants a 3rd bridge built, keeping the current interstate bridge where it is. Gluesenkamp-Perez is somewhat concerned about the businesses that are on the Vancouver side of the bridge and what happens with them. How do you see that race, this race, figuring into that issue?
It takes so long to build something as big as an interstate bridge that a person running for a 2-year office can want this, that, or the other thing. But that term in office is going to end before the first rivet goes into that bridge. So it's okay to talk about it. That's fine and dandy. This thing is going to take as much time as it's going to take. You and I have been reporting about building a new interstate bridge since the beginning of our terms in office, right? I mean, it's been going on for a long, long period of time. I think a third bridge is a tough sell. I think a third bridge is a lot more money. I also think the current I-5 bridge is 100 years old, parts of it, and it probably is time to get to remove it. So how that's going to play in this one, I don't know that it is going to play that big in this one.
We're going to take a break, and there's much more to come on this Eye on Northwest Politics election special. A crowded field, a new voting system, the challenges for Portland voters as they pick their new mayor and a new expanded city council. And a little later, what to know and what to avoid when you fill out your ranked choice voting ballot. Back here with Dana Haynes from Carpenter Media. Portland will have a new mayor after this election since Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler is not running for re-election. 19 candidates running for Portland mayor, including 3 current Portland City Commissioners, Rene Gonzalez, Carmen Rubio, and Mingus Mapps. And a dark horse candidate, trucking company owner Keith Wilson, is making waves with his laser focus on solving the homeless crisis after being a virtual unknown when the campaigns began. The new mayor will be elected by a new system of ranked choice voting, the first for ranked choice voting in a Portland city election. In fact, one poll shows that with the multiple rounds of ranked choice voting, Keith Wilson could leapfrog the better-known city commissioners in later rounds and has a path to victory if things fall in his favor. Now, we've had all 3 commissioners, stripper Liv Ostus, also a mayoral candidate, and Keith Wilson on Eye on Northwest Politics, and I asked Keith Wilson back in May why he was running for mayor.
I grew a successful business, and then I started looking around about 6-7 years ago. I don't recognize my city with all the human misery that is evident in every drive that we take.
I spoke with Mingus Mapps this weekend about the city's homeless crisis and Carmen Rubio in September.
We literally have a contract that says the city and the county shall clearly define what the city's lane in the homelessness space is and what the county's lane in the homelessness space is. We have not done that yet. That needs to happen.
We are also doing everything we can to end unsheltered homelessness and making sure that our social service system is up and running and that system is not fragmented but efficient and actually moves people through.
And candidate Rene Gonzalez, Commissioner Gonzalez, said this just last week at a city council meeting about the decision among 3 council members to explore dissolving its homeless services agreement with Multnomah County.
The steering committee has some value. It's just not solving all of the problems we were hoping for in the time frame we were looking for.
Now, one of the duties of the new mayor will be to name a city manager or city administrator to oversee all city bureaus. The bureaus were run by individual commissioners under the old system. And Dana, let's talk about the big differences that Portland voters will see as they make their choice for mayor.
Well, first off, 2 things change radically. How the government structure works. We had 1 mayor and 4 commissioners. Now we're going to have a mayor who doesn't vote on many things and 12 commissioners. Plus we have that ranked choice voting. Both things are being interacted at the same time. It's going to be a little bit confusing. We're going to have a brand new mayor who's going to have to work with a city manager. We've never had that before. Who's going to have to work with a council president. We've never had that before. Who's going to have to weave his or her way through 12 members of the city council. We've never seen that before. And this is a mayor, we don't 100% know what the responsibilities of the new mayor are. The person isn't going to vote all that often. The person's going to be working with the city manager to run the day-to-day operations while the politics happens with the the city council. So it's going to be vastly different for voters. It's going to be vastly different for the office holders too.
Will the new mayor be more of a figurehead and a booster than an administrator?
The way I've been looking at it, it could go to one of 2 ways. You're either going to get a cheerleader mayor who's going to be out there singing the praises of Portland every place he or she can, or you're going to get a person who's just locked in the trenches with the city manager running the day-to-day operation and making sure that the trains run on time, if you'll forgive that colloquialism. A lot less politics, a lot more of cheering for the city and running stuff. While that mix is going to come together, we don't know that yet.
Well, as we've been talking about, whoever wins the mayoral seat will oversee a completely new system of government. Portland, as we mentioned, expanding its city council from 5 to 12 members, 5 members of city council now, if you include the mayor in that, who does have a vote now. They'll be elected by voters in 4 districts rather than citywide. And as we mentioned, we'll add that city manager position. Now, this map shows the districts as chosen by the Independent Charter Commission in July of 2023. Portland voters approved the new form of government in the November 2022 election. So look at all the candidates running in the 4 districts. All the candidates, including the nearly 100 running for the new council seats, will be elected by ranked choice voting for the first time. We'll take a closer look at exactly how ranked choice voting works a little later. Now, Dana, with all these people running for seats district-wide instead of at large, as has been the case before, how do you see the city council races from a voter perspective? I mean, how can the voters in the city of Portland figure all this out and make informed choices?
Danged if I know. I'm having trouble with myself doing it. But the thing to remember is that each of the 4 districts is going to have 3 councilors. So I live downtown. I'm going to have 3 different people representing me. And if the magic number to be mayor is 50% of the vote plus 1, the magic number in a multi-winner election is 25% plus 1, which means we could have a number of people on the city council who won with 26, 27% of the vote. Not necessarily anywhere near a majority of people saying yes for them. How are they going to interact with each other? I guess we're going to find that out. We don't know that yet. Where are they going to have offices? I'm unclear about where they're going to be on a day-to-day basis. They're not going to be at City Hall. There's not that many offices there. So there are a lot of questions that voters are going to have about how this structure works. I would have hoped that we could have done the ranked choice voting in one election and the new governance model in another election and not conflate those 2 things, because I really fear that the combination of those 2 things could turn some voters off. They may look at their ballots and say, heck, that's too confusing for me. I'm going to sit this one out. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could, and it worries me.
For the city council races, you can choose up to 6 candidates, and you rank them in your order of preference. Do you think everybody will vote for 6? Or will some people say, well, I just know these 3, and I'm just going to vote for them?
My wife's going to vote for one person in one of the districts because she knows her. And she goes, I want her to win. I don't want anybody else to win, so I'm going to vote for one. And you can do that with ranked choice voting. You can go say, I'm going to vote for 1 or 2 or 3 or all 6 if you wish. And the undervotes are factored in. And how it's going to work is if you pick your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, at the end of the 1st round, if the person, nobody's won outright, the person with the fewest votes is going to drop out. If that was your number 1 pick, your number 2 inherits your vote. Mm-hmm. If in the next round that person, your number 2 gets dropped out, the number 3 inherits your vote. That's the way the system works. It's confusing and weird for us because we haven't done it, but it's been used in Maine, it's been used in Alaska, the city of San Francisco uses it, it's been around for a long time, it's got a track record of success. I'm cautiously optimistic about ranked choice voting, but I do think it's going to be confusing for some people to figure out exactly how this is going to work, especially with that multi-winner election.
And then, it might take a little while on election night to figure out who exactly the winners are because of the number of rounds that we go through because of ranked choice voting.
In Oregon, if you have your ballots postmarked by Election Day, they still count, which means that the Multnomah County Elections Department could get ballots on Monday after that Tuesday. A full 7 days later, it's possible that some of the ballots will come in. Until every ballot is in, you won't be able to declare a winner. You'll only be able to declare who's leading. So on election night, we will know who's leading. We will not know who won. And that's going to be true the next night. It's going to be true the next night after that. And that's going to be hard for people to figure out.
Well, next, 2 races that could determine the future of the Multnomah County Commission. A look ahead at the matchups, one in which includes a former Portland mayor vying for a return to the political spotlight. We'll be right back. Two races left for Multnomah County Commissioner. Social Services Public Policy expert Megan Moyer faces off against Administrative Law Judge Vadim Mazursky for District 1. And former Portland Mayor Sam Adams faces clinically trained social worker Shannon Singleton for District 2. Julia Brim Edwards and Vince Jones Dixon previously won their contest for seats 3 and 4 respectively. Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson is not up for re-election until 2026. Seats on the commission are non-partisan. Well, let's get some final thoughts from Dana Haynes about races to watch on election night. Dana, what will you be following most closely?
2 things. Oregon 5th, that's just crucial to who's going to control the U.S. House. So we're going to be watching that one like a hawk. And then we really want to see what kind of election outcome we get on the the Portland races. We want to see if the voter turnout on the first night is what it had been 2 years, 4 years, 8 years ago. See if there's any drop off of voter participation. We're going to be watching that very carefully. And a quick reminder, by the way, if you're in Portland, you're getting 2 ballots in the mail. One for like a school district race or a state race, special districts, and the other one for that mayor, auditor, and city council. So you had to fill out both ballots.
All right. Well, if you want to follow this midterm election or any other stories in the Portland Tribune, and you can know what Dana Haynes is working on, you can do that by going to portlandtribune.com. Next, Multnomah County Elections Director Tim Scott and I take you through the process and the pitfalls of ranked choice voting. That's coming up next. Welcome back to this Eye on Northwest Politics election special. In July, Multnomah County Elections Director Tim Scott stopped by to show us a few tips and tricks to successfully fill out your first ranked choice voting ballot. Well, let's start out taking a look at an example of a correctly filled out ranked choice ballot. So what is the biggest mistake that you expect people to make when they're trying to do this?
Research shows that ranked choice voting is easy to adopt for voters, but we're anticipating that voters might get confused about only one mark in one column, which is each rank, or only one mark in each row, which is each candidate. So we've used this grid style layout with the cross marks so that people can easily move over for the candidate to the rank.
You're concerned about that. Let's take a look at what that would look like. So we've got in the third rank, we've got 2 votes here in the same column, which is wrong. So what happens if you see something like this?
So in this instance, if there's no attempt by the voter to show their intent, like they prefer one more than the other, then that would be a true overvote. And so what happens is their rank 3 vote would take the place of the rank 2 vote. All of the columns would essentially just shift up like it shows in our video.
What happens if I do make a mistake and I catch it before I send off the ballot? I go through it and I say, oh man, I made an error there. How can I fix it?
Well, that's the best case scenario. Before you send it off to us, check over your ballot, make sure you haven't made any mistakes. And if you have a situation like this, just cross out the oval that you don't want. Just make an X through it with your pen. And our team at the elections office is inspecting every ballot when it comes back to make sure voter intent is clear. And if that's the case, we'll be able to adjudicate that ballot to the correctly noted candidate.
Can you send out replacement ballots in cases where you can't figure out the intent of the voter?
We can, absolutely. If a voter reaches out to us with enough time for us to mail a ballot, as long as they haven't returned their original ballot, we can mail them a new ballot, or they can come into either of our election offices to get a replacement ballot.
There are winning thresholds here, and let's take a look at the thresholds. 50% plus 1 for single winners, single candidate winners, 25% plus 1 for the multiple candidates, which is going to be the case for Portland City Council. What happens to the extra votes once a candidate reaches the threshold?
So in single winner elections, there's only one winner. Therefore, if the winning candidate gets above the 50% plus 1 mark, which is required, then they are elected and their surplus is not transferred. But in multi-winner ranked choice voting, which is what City Council will use, when there's a surplus over the 25% plus 1, then a portion of each of the votes on each of the ballots for that winner transfers to the second place candidate.
So is it possible that during the rounds of counting that somebody you didn't vote for will get a portion of your vote?
No, it's only going to transfer to the next active candidate on your ballot. And I would encourage people to only vote for candidates that they are interested in getting elected. It is very possible that your first choice might not get elected, but your second or third might.
Well, with so many candidates for Portland City Council, where this is really going to come into play this November, and multiple rounds, we've got vote by mail. Do you anticipate any delays in reporting the results?
I don't anticipate any delays. We are going to be producing preliminary reports for all contests, just like we do every election. We will be releasing our first results report right at 8 o'clock, as we always do, and then as frequently as we can after that, both for ranked choice voting contests as well as all of the traditional contests using first past the post.
Now, there have been some concern by other states about mail-in voting. We've been using mail-in ballots in the state, statewide, since the year 2000. What can you tell people in other states about the efficacy of mail-in voting?
Well, what we know from our experience in Oregon is that vote by mail works. It's convenient for voters. It makes participation easy. And we have great security precautions in place to make sure that nothing happens to the ballots in transit. Being in the Portland metro area, we get excellent customer service from the USPS, and they are frequently making sure that our ballots get delivered on time in the delivery window.
Well, Tim Scott, thank you very much for being on Eye on Northwest Politics, giving us a little more insight into ranked choice voting and how it will work.
Thank you very much.
Now let's talk big state races and measures. And joining me for that part of the conversation is Rick Metzger, political analyst and former Oregon State Senator. And let's start with the race for Attorney General. Well, a lively and sometimes contentious debate in the KOIN 6 studio last week. Democrat and former Speaker of the Oregon House Dan Rayfield and Will Lathrop, former Deputy District Attorney in both Marion and Yamhill counties. They squared off in a debate on moderated, so take a quick look.
Priority number one is that the Attorney General is supposed to run point on all organized crime. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized retail theft. All three of those things are astronomically high in the state of Oregon because of a failure of leadership. So my first order of business is to take on drug trafficking and the drug cartel.
The first priority that I have in this role is to keep our communities safe. And that means tackling the drug delivery issues in all four corners of our state. That also means keeping our children safe from internet crimes. It also means that we need an Attorney General that is going to be the Attorney General for all Oregonians. Aging Oregonians are so much.
We did hit a range of topics from fighting fentanyl at the border to suing big corporations to abortion rights. We've got that entire debate on KOIN.com if you want to check it out. And there are some contentious moments in that debate, so you might want to see it if you haven't already. Now, Rick, the AG office runs the Oregon Department of Justice, has a $500 million budget, more than 1,300 employees. What's at stake for the voters here in the Secretary of State race?
In the Secretary of State?
In the Attorney General race, I'm sorry.
This is probably going to be the most interesting, I think, of the statewide races, both because of the background credibility of the two candidates. I think what voters are going to find most interesting is who is going to be the one who's going to be proactive in addressing the serious issues, the crime, the things that were mentioned in your debate. Who is going to be most proactive in addressing those rather than reactive? I think both candidates have a good background in that. You're actually running a department. You're not just the frontline prosecutor, say, as Mr. Lathrop was. You're also running a department.
So you're also an administrator.
And you're an administrator of a lot of people and making sure the assignments are done. So both of them have a lot of credibility they bring to that office. I think it's going to be perhaps the most interesting one. I think that Rayfield may have an edge in that race because of his visibility as the Speaker of the House. But I think Mr. Lathrop has a good background that will appeal to voters.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other issues here. Oregonians will also elect a new Secretary of State. Current State Treasurer and Democrat Tobias Reed facing off against Republican State Senator Dennis Linthicum. Linthicum is one of the state senators who walked out and halted business at the legislature in 2023 over bills supporting reproductive rights and transgender care. Now, Linthicum is barred from running for the legislature again this term because of the walkout, and so he decided to run for the Oregon Secretary of State. Big differences here, too, between the two candidates. Reed says he wants to preserve transparency and strengthen Oregon's election system, and Linthicum says he wants to end Oregon's vote-by-mail system over concerns of election fraud. So you take a look at this race, Rick, and what do you see?
Well, you know, one big difference between the two, right off the bat, is that Tobias Reed has been on a statewide ballot 6 times. Mr. Linthicum has never been on the statewide ballot, so he's really unknown to the majority of voters. Again, if you look at the contributions, Tobias Reed is like $1.7 million. I still has over $1 million in the bank. Mr. Linthicum has raised barely over $100,000. So he doesn't have the presence that he needs in order to inform the voters about who he is. I think the difference of being well-known, the fact that Tobias is generally well-liked on both sides of the aisle, both as treasurer and his time in the legislature, I think this race is clearly Mr. Reed's to lose. I think he should win this race rather easily.
Okay, overall, Rick, how do you see these two races shaping up come election night?
Well, I kind of have always said that politics is a lot like football, all right? So you remember last weekend, the Oregon Ducks beat Ohio State 32-31 at Autzen Stadium.
How could we forget that? Yes.
In the last 33 home games, the Ducks are 32-1. Do you know what other team has an identical record?
No, but I'm sure you do.
Oregon Democrats. In the last 33 elections for statewide office, the Democrats are 32-1. And if you look at the polling and you look at the money, I don't see any reason why that trend is not going to continue.
32-1. Who is the one?
Dennis Richardson beat Brad Avakian for Secretary of State about 8 years ago.
3 more races that we're watching. Former State Senator Brian Boquist is up against State Senator Elizabeth Steiner. That is that race there. And in Washington State, Attorney General Bob Ferguson faces off against former U.S. Representative Dave Reichert. Incumbent Senator Maria Cantwell goes up against Dr. Raul Garcia. Now, we'll be right back. Rick Metzger is sticking around, and we'll discuss state measures getting attention, including one that would greenlight ranked choice voting for state offices and another that would allow the legislature to impeach the governor, among others. We'll be right back. Well, let's take you through some state measures, beginning with Measure 115. It would allow the impeachment of some state executives, including the governor, the attorney general, the treasurer, and the commissioner of labor and industries. That measure would require a 2/3 vote in the House to impeach and 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict and remove from office. Right now, Oregon is the only state where the legislature doesn't have the power to impeach the governor. So let's talk a little bit about that. One thing that's really interesting about this measure is that the legislators themselves exempted themselves from that impeachment power. So what do you make of that?
Well, that's not surprising. As you notice throughout the ballot, they exempt themselves from just about everything, right? This is a measure, by the way, there's no organized support group for this. There's no organized opposition group. So people are just going to vote on their gut feeling. And I can assure you this is going to be a slam dunk. People like accountability. They like the idea, if need be, to throw the bums out. Oregon already has, of course, a referendum process where you can recall a governor or a secretary of state. But, of course, that's costly. You have to get signatures. This makes it a lot easier. I think it's going to pass very, very easily. And I think citizens are going to say, hey, yeah, I'd like to have a couple of ways, if I have a bad apple, that I want to be able to move on.
Can you think of any instances where that might have come into play in our past politics?
Well, I mean, certainly most recently with Shemia Fagan. Had she not resigned, this if this was in effect, I think it would be highly likely the legislature would have done that in that situation.
Yes. Now to Measure 116. That would create a commission to set salaries for state elected officials, including the governor and state senators and representatives. A lot of people support this measure, including the Democratic Party of Oregon. Critics say it allows officials to get pay raises without having to take responsibility for it. And then we're talking about Oregon's Measure 117. If approved, that will bring ranked choice voting to some Oregon races, including senator, governor, and attorney general. So Portland is going to be the first one to use ranked choice voting. Multnomah County is going to ranked choice voting next year. And if this measure passes, then it will be statewide. But you say, Rick, there's a twist to all this.
There's actually two twists. Number one is this was passed by the legislature, thinking it was good for democracy. But the legislator said, oh, but not for me. They exempted their own races from ranked choice voting. So that's going to give voters some pause. If this is so good, then why don't you want it when you're up for election? The second part of it is it's compared to Alaska and Maine. That's totally different. Alaska is an open primary. Republican, Democrat, Independent, unaffiliated, Green Party all run in the same primary. And there you get the full fruits of ranked choice voting. In Maine, the independents, the non-affiliated you mentioned, not only are they the biggest class of voters in Oregon, they're the biggest class of voters in Maine. They get to vote in a Democratic or Republican primary. Under this scenario, the primaries are remaining closed. So you will have ranked choice voting where Democrats will just rank Democrats in the primary. Republicans will just rank Republicans in the primary. And when you get to the general election, you know, the two major show horses are still going to be one Democrat and one Republican. So in order to really get the promises of ranked choice voting, you would think they would have gone to an open primary system, but the parties don't want to do that.
And that's because the party machinery is just so strong on both sides.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. We'll take a break and be back with one more measure that's getting a lot of attention. It would be the biggest tax increase in the state's history on corporations doing business in Oregon, and it would give cash to Oregonians, put money right in their pocket. We'll be right back. Welcome back. One of the most dramatic tax changes in Oregon history will be on the ballot in November. And if it passes, it could put hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars in your family's pocket. Ballot Measure 118 is already getting a lot of attention, especially from opponents who have pumped almost $6 million into the campaign to defeat it. Labeled as the Oregon rebate, Measure 118 would raise the corporate minimum tax by 3% on sales exceeding $25 million. The State Revenue Office says that's an extra $7 billion a year. The tax revenue would be redistributed to every Oregon resident who has lived in the state for at least 200 days during the tax year, starting with the 2025 tax year. The Yes on Measure 118 campaign says it would mean a $1,600 annual rebate for every Oregonian. That's essentially a universal income. Now, in August, I sat down with the chief petitioner for Measure 118, Antonio Gisbert, and Angela Wilhelms, president of Oregon Business and Industry, which is against the measure.
The biggest corporations in particular are just not paying their fair share in taxes in Oregon.
When you tax sales, that means consumers have higher prices. They'll have higher prices on food, gasoline, even medicine.
Most major business organizations and legislative leaders in the state from both parties are against this. So are the grocery retailers to major industries, including Standard Insurance and Daimler Trucks. Governor Kotek is against it as well. So let's take a look at this Measure 118. It's been getting a lot of press. A lot of people are talking about it. The idea of everybody in Oregon getting $1,600 in their pockets at the end of the year sounds pretty good. Rick, how do you see this?
Well, it does. Free money. Everybody likes the idea of free money, but most people understand nothing is absolutely free. I mean, this is, as you mentioned, this is a $7 billion sales tax, billion with a B, by far the largest tax in the history of Oregon. And at the end of the day, the consumers are going to pay that tax when just about everything they buy. And that's why the individuals that you mentioned, and you have people from grocers, to wall and ceiling contractors, electrical contractors, public labor unions, to business groups. For the first time I've ever seen on a ballot measure, all on the same page. It's bad for Oregon's economy. I think there's a lot of good heart in the idea that Mr. Gisbert has, but this universal income and making the consumers at the end of the day pay for it is an approach that I don't think Oregonians are going to buy. I think they're also concerned about always being the petri dish for these social, political ideologues from out of state who want to use Oregon as a training ground for some of their ideas. So there's some good ideas behind it. The implementation of this, I think Oregonians are going to reject.
One of the things that Angela Wilhelm said in that interview that we just took a snippet of is that it's a disincentive for businesses to do business in the state. Mr. Gisbert says that, well, these are mostly national and international corporations and they're just getting taxed on their sales here in this state. So what do you say to that argument that it's a disincentive, actually a disincentive for businesses?
Look at it this way. You want to buy a new truck in the city of Portland, it's say made by Ford or GM, they're paying that tax. You're going to pay a couple $1,000s more probably for that truck. But you could go over to Vancouver and have your business and no one has to pay that tax. So what's that going to do, with the automobile market? When you want to have some work done on your home and you bring electrical contractors in. Yeah, it's big companies that make that wire, but it's sold to that little company that's then installing that wire in your home and you're going to be paying for that. So at the end of the day, it always comes down to the consumer. Plus, the way it was written, which was pretty haphazard, as you know, it was a napkin in Eugene. The way our tax system works, it's going to hurt the state budget because other deductions will be allowed by some of these larger companies, and it's going to cost upwards of $1 billion a year. And most of the state budget, as you know, goes to health care for the poor and for public schools. But I think the way it's construed, the way it's implemented is not the way that I think Oregonians are going to support.
All right, so you don't think that this has much of a chance of passing then?
Well, there's always that gut feeling that you mentioned, where someone will sit at that table and say, I think I'll take that $1,600, let the legislature figure out the rest of it.
Finally, we've got Measure 119. That would make it easier for workers in the cannabis industry to unionize. This one is advocated by United Food and Commercial Workers Local 555. Critics shut down a similar effort in the legislature last year, contending that approval would violate federal law. KOIN 6 is the place to be on election night. CBS News will bring you live results on the presidential race. Plus, KOIN 6, your local election headquarters, will bring you live cut-ins and reports throughout the night. That is on November 5th, Tuesday, November 5th, election night on KOIN 6. That'll do it for our Eye on Northwest Politics election special. Thanks again to Rick Metzger for your time and insight on our program, and thank you to Dana Haynes as well. And thank you all for joining us at home. Remember, get out there and vote. Have a great night.